with Trap being the next huge horror release of this year coming out next week, directed by M.Night Shyamalan, I realized what a better time to talk about M.Night Shyamalan, his movies, the reason behind his movies, and all of that. And that's what in today's video I'm going to be doing what's probably my most complicated video until now over my channel, which is analyzing the psychological horror of deaths of The Sixth Sense and Split, directed by M.Night Shyamalan. Now, a little bit of history behind this topic is that this was actually my video essay and my written essay for a module on my third and final year at uni. This was my dissertation, this was my thesis, so this was like my graduation paper, let's say. Basically what we had to do is we had to find and we had to talk about a topic in film in general that we felt identified with and that we felt passionate about. So obviously I had to do mine about horror. And in case you didn't know, M. Night Shyamalan is my favorite director of all time, horror and non-horror. So obviously I had to talk about him. And at the same time, because I had to be as specific as possible, psychological horror movies have always been on my top 3 subgenres in horror. So I always been like intrigued and interested on why do we feel certain ways when we watch psychological horror movies or just horror in general. Why do we discover feelings or emotions that we didn't know we had? So I always been intrigued for that, and because M. Night Shyamalan, most of his films involve psychology, there is so much psychology behind his films. I had my 3 elements to do my video essay. I had horror, I had M. Night, and I had 2 of his most popular films, which are The Sixth Sense and Split. So just a few disclaimers before we start with today's video. The first one is that this video is not reviewing The Sixth Sense or Split. No, this is analyzing the psychology behind those 2 huge films that came out a few decades ago. And at the same time, I will be dividing this video into 6 chapters, because before I start talking about The Sixth Sense and Split, I will need to talk about psychology overall, psychological horror movies, genre, of horror as a genre, psychological horror as a subgenre, a lot of history behind the psychological horror movies that we know and that we love. Because if we don't know anything about that, if we don't talk about that, then how will I talk about The Sixth Sense and Split? Because if psychological horror movies didn't exist, if that term didn't exist, obviously The Sixth Sense and Split wouldn't exist. So everything had to be combined. Another disclaimer that I have to do, and this is huge, this is crucial, is that obviously I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, or everything that I'm doing here was based on my own research, on my own time, written articles from doctors, psychologists, which I will leave everything down below, all of my resources, my actual written thesis, written essay, so you can have a look, so you can have a read, in case you're interested in that, because obviously if you're suffering from mental health, if you have a trauma and all of that, please do seek a professional, because they will know how to help you out. Because what I'm doing here is I'm analyzing 2 fictional films. I'm analyzing the psychology behind those 2 films. What do professionals think about those 2 films or horror as a genre? I'm not giving any advices to the audience overall, because again, I'm not a psychologist or a doctor, so please bear that in mind. So I really hope that you're interested in this topic. I'm really proud of this video or the essay that I've written, because I just love how complex horror is. So I really hope that you learned so much from this video essay. I really hope that you take something out of this, even if you're not a psychological horror fan. I really hope that you learn something. So sit back, grab a drink, grab a snack, and enjoy my video essay about the psychological horror depths of The Sixth Sense and Split. In the world of cinema, few genres possess the power to delve into the darkest depths of the human psyche, quite like horror and its subgenre psychological horror. The intriguing aspect of this genre transcends solidly on its ability to induce fear and its capacity to prove the horror depths of the human conscious through masterfully storytelling, visual imaginary, terrifying landscapes, and haunting sound design. Filmmakers have long captivated audiences with narratives that explore the complexities of the mind, For example, films like Inception, directed by Christopher Nolan, and Black Swan, directed by Darren Aronofsky. Psychological horror films also interact with the manipulation that is portrayed in the film, the atmosphere where the characters are developing or healing, the symbolism behind their actions, and the suspense of the storyline. These interactions will evoke a sense of unease and discomfort in the audience, challenging the viewers to analyze their perception of reality and, as a whole, blurring the lines between the conscious and the subconscious on the audience because of the impact they have while watching the film. For example, with psychological horror films such as The Shining from 1980, directed by Stanley Kubrick, audiences get to feel claustrophobic with the home abuse portrayed in the film, making them think if they're experiencing something similar in their personal lives. The effectiveness of psychological horror originates from its unparalleled ability to go beyond the typical shock value that is usually portrayed in horror films. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, directed by Tobe Hooper, Hostel from 2005, directed by Eli Roth, and The Hill Have Eyes from 1977, directed by Wes Craven, are films that often rely on shocking visuals and intense gore to evoke fear in the audience, focusing on external threats and physical violence rather than psychological depths. Psychological horror operates by exploring the audience's deepest fears and vulnerabilities that usually work as a trigger for the anxieties in the audience. For example, films such as The Witch from 2015, directed by Robert Eggers, It Follows from 2014, directed by David Robert Mitchell, and Get Out from 2017, directed by Jordan Peele. During the article called Psychology and Neurobiology of Horror Movies, psychology professor and Dr. Lori Numemna explores and covers the neurobiological and psychological aspects of fear and anxiety in horror movies. Dr. Lori explains that some fears are nearly universal and thus powerful themes for psychological horror movies. This explains why the majority of the audience experience the fear of either suffering or witnessing a mental illness disorder. There have been arguments and discussions regarding whether film directors and writers are right or wrong to address mental illness in their films. Audiences have usually argued that filmmakers have a responsibility to portray mental illness both accurately and sensitively, as it can impact how society perceives and understands the mental illness issues portrayed on film. Because if a representation is not really clear or accurate, that can lead to misrepresentation, which in then can perpetuate media product depictions where the villain is often a character with mental illness. In the last few decades, there have been a variety of horror films that associate a certain mental illness with possessions. They often have explored themes of possession and mental illness in their narratives. The association of mental illness with possession or demons is a topic that has been explored in various contexts, including literature, film, religious beliefs, and cultural practices. The Exorcist from 1973 follows a demonic possession from a young girl with a suspense exorcism performed by two priests. While the primary focus of the film is on the supernatural aspects of possession, The Exorcist also touches on things of mental illness because when the young girl starts to behave possessed, it is initially believed to be a result of psychological issues. The Babadook from 2014 is a psychological horror film where a mother and a son are haunted by a sinister presence. However, as the story develops, it is understood that the demonic presence represents the mother's unresolved grief and trauma following her husband's death. Hereditary from 2019 is often considered one of the greatest psychological horror movies. The film centers on a family plagued by tragic events and disturbing occurrences following the death of the grandmother. Themes of inherited mental illness and the supernatural lead to a chilling exploration of grief, trauma, and demonic influence. The Taking of Deborah Logan from 2014 follows an elderly woman who is exhibiting signs of Alzheimer's. As the film develops with her condition, there is an association with a demonic entity and the elderly woman. These films illustrate how horror cinema often explores the blurred lines between supernatural phenomena and mental illness, creating atmospheric and thought-provoking narratives that delve into the dark side of the human psyche. Guillermo del Toro, a prominent horror filmmaker, has spoken about the intersection of mental illness and horror, stating, "In the best horror films, the monster is the one you can identify with. It's the mother, the boyfriend, the next-door neighbor. It's not just a monster, it's a person that's actually mentally ill. This statement highlights Del Toro's perspective on how effective horror films often humanize their monsters, blurring the lines between supernatural horror, potential horror, and psychological realism. He also has suggested in a Netflix interview, Guillermo del Toro and Mike Flanagan shared the greatest fears that the most compelling villains are those that reflect aspects of human nature, including mental illness, adding depth and complexity to the horror narrative, emphasizing that what scares him the most in horror films are not the demons or zombies, but the actual human beings. M.Night Shyamalan is a filmmaker whose name has become synonymous with suspense, surprise, and controversy in the horror genre for the last few decades. He is a filmmaker that fantasizes and frustrates his audience in equal measure. His creative career has been defined by extraordinary successful films, where he has been able to captivate audiences for decades. On the other hand, M. Night Shyamalan has made an impact in the horror and thriller genres for his unique and original approach to storytelling and his mastery of suspense filmmaking techniques, influencing the horror and thriller genres in different aspects. Emphasizing on atmosphere and tension is something that Shyamalan has been building throughout his career on his films, with a combination of slow-pacing scenes, atmospheric visuals, and sound design. Shyamalan manages to create a sense of the unease. One of the aspects that has been more memorable throughout M. Night Shyamalan's career is his exploration of supernatural themes, blending supernatural elements such as ghosts, aliens, and unusual human abilities with psychological depth and emotional resonance. Genre criticism often explores the evolution of different genres in film and their historical development, examining how they have changed over the last few decades. This can involve analyzing the influence of cultural, technological, and social factors on the evolution of genres in film. For example, the evolution of the genre in horror can be a comparison between two horror films like Night of the Living Dead from 1968, directed by George R. Romero, where a group of people try to survive an attack of bloodthirsty zombies while trapped in a farmhouse, where a radiation fallout from a recent space explosion is the cause for these events to happen. Meanwhile, if it is compared to a similar film that came out 48 years later, it is understandable the evolution of the horror genre throughout the decades. Train to Busan from 2016, directed by Yeon Sang-ho, is a South Korean horror film where a martial law is declared when a mysterious virus outbreak pushes the country into a state of emergency. We can understand the similarities between both films, but we can also witness the evolution of this concept in horror, where Night of the Living Dead has that simpler look and aesthetic with a less likely to harm storyline, but Train to Busan has a stronger visuals with a storyline that could happen in the world we are currently living in. Writer William Indig, an associate professor of psychology at William Patterson University, has stated in his 2006 book, Psychothriller Cinematic Explorations of the Mysteries of the Mind, that, as one of the premier sciences during the last century, psychology, horror, and thriller films came up and aged together at the same time. The archetypal character of the century in film, characters like the mad scientist, the psycho killer, and the evil psychiatrist were often developed in direct references to the psychological themes that inspired them. Frankenstein from 1931, directed by James Whale, The Fly from 1958, directed by Carl Newman, and The Human Centipede from 2009, directed by Tom Six, are a few examples of horror films that showcase the archetype of the mad scientist and the ethical dilemmas and horrifying consequences that often accompany their experiments and pursuits of forbidden knowledge. On the other hand, films such as Psycho from 1960, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, Halloween from 1978, directed by John Kramer, and The Silence of the Lambs from 1991, directed by Jonathan Demme, are some examples of horror films that portray the complexity of psycho killers, exploring the darkest depths of human depravity and the terror they inflict on their victims. Taking place in 1999, The Sixth Sense revolves around Dr. Malcolm Crowe, a child psychologist portrayed by Bruce Willis, who attempts to help a young boy named Cole Sher, played by Haley Joel Osment. Cole claims to see and communicate with the dead. The film explores the psychological tool of the Sixth Sense on both Cole and Dr. Crowe. Although the film does not explicitly diagnose Cole with schizophrenia, his attitudes and experiences throughout the film share similarities with symptoms associated with the mental illness disorder, such as hallucinations and the delusions Cole experiments in the film. MRCS, DPM Humphrey Hosmond, and MBBCH John Smithmans from the National Hospital Queen's Square at the University of Cambridge confirmed that it is more approachable to find the symptoms of schizophrenia, having evidence that shy, shut-in people are more liable to schizophrenia than outgoing people. Not age is exempt, but the first attack usually occurs in young adulthood. I can understand why The Sixth Sense does not literally diagnose Cole with the disorder, but instead, the film allows the audience to understand his symptoms. That when he sees dead bodies and hears their voices, the moment he pays another child to pretend to be his friend in front of his mother, when he sees other kids playing while he's sitting by himself on the bench, or when he is delusional, when he believes things that are not true. In the context of the film, Cole's ability to see and communicate with ghosts serves as a central plot element, driving the narrative forward and allowing the storyline to explore three main themes of psychology. First one will be trauma, when at the beginning of the film we see Cole as a troubled boy who is socially withdrawn and emotionally distant. Second one will be redemption, where Cole suffers rejection and isolation when his ability to communicate with the dead causes him to be misunderstood by his own mother. And acceptance. Throughout the film, Cole attends therapy sessions with Dr. Malcolm. Through their interactions, Cole opens up about his struggles, revealing the extent of his trauma as the film progresses. Cole's encounters with the spirits from the dead lead to moments of emotional release where Cole begins to confront his own trauma, finding healing and acceptance. Psychiatrist Sharon Packer discusses that characters with schizophrenia featured in movies can be portrayed as a negative stereotype, suggesting that they can be portrayed as violent, dangerous. However, she claims that although The Sixth Sense is a film that exaggerates certain aspects of schizophrenia in order for the film to have a plot, she also praises the film for creating a better understanding of the different symptoms that follow the illness. My attitude towards The Sixth Sense shifted when I realized that I had been treating a patient similar to Cole. Clues were hiding in plain sight, much as they were in Shyamalan's film. On the other hand, if we go all the way back to 2016, Split takes a different psychological approach than The Sixth Sense, delving into the world of dissociative identity disorder, DID, through the character of Kevin Wendell Crumb, played by James McAvoy. Kevin exhibits 24 distinct personalities, with the 24th known as the Beast. After being kidnapped by Kevin, 3 teenage girls must figure out his friendly personas before he releases the Beast. As stated by the International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems from 1992, to classify someone with DID, the individual must exhibit 2 or more distinct personalities that take turn controlling the individual's behavior. In the film, the switching of personalities is portrayed during scenes where Kevin interacts with his therapist, Dr. Fletcher. There is a particular scene where Kevin is behaving as Barry, a friendly, talkative fashion designer, but Dr. Fletcher knows she is actually communicating with Dennis, a manipulative, cold, temperamental leader in Kevin's body. The transitions between the personalities are often sudden and dramatic in order to reflect the complexity of his condition. Professor and psychologist Kevin Mealy from Robert Morris University reflects on what aspects about the DID disorder are accurate or not in Split. DID is typically caused by childhood trauma. Individuals are subjected to a sort of physical or emotional torture that they cannot cope with at their current development period. We can witness Kevin's childhood trauma when, in the film, we get transported to a flashback about his childhood, where his mom, Penelope Crumb, abuses Kevin both mentally and physically, to the point of kicking him out of the house at a young age. Because of the connection Split has with Unbreakable from 2000, also directed by M.Night Shyamalan, we learn that Penelope also suffered from DID. The power of belief in Split introduces a fascinating psychological element, where the belief in Kevin's capabilities can induce psychological changes in his body and mind. The manifestation of the 24th personality, the Beast, is an example of a driven action by belief in supernatural abilities, which are described and shown as Kevin is transforming into the Beast. The perception and definition of reality in both films revolve around the concept of alternate perception. In The Sixth Sense, the film challenges the conventional understanding of reality when it is not revealed until the end that the character Dr. Malcolm was dead the entire time, while in Split, the multiple personalities in Kevin's body challenge the coherence in the individual's identity. The therapeutic relationship between the protagonist and their mentors, Dr. Crow in The Sixth Sense and Dr. Karen Fletcher in Split, is integral to the narrative of both films. Each film highlights the role of supportive relationships in the process of psychological healing and self-discovery. Director Shyamalan says of The Sixth Sense, ultimately, it's about learning how to communicate those fears, whether it's communication between a doctor and the patient, partner to partner, a mother and a son, or between ourselves and loved ones who passed on. As we all have seen, not communicating with or keeping secrets from people we love can destroy marriages, careers, families, and even lives. That in itself is horrifying. The Sixth Sense also had an impact on the understanding of mental health in both adults and children, highlighting the importance of therapy, empathy, and understanding in addressing mental health issues. The Sixth Sense raised awareness about the importance of early intervention and support for individuals dealing with psychological difficulties. Split brought attention to the existence of DID, provoking conversations about its symptoms, causes, and treatment. It crystallized the challenges faced by individuals living with the disorder and the potential impact on their lives. While The Sixth Sense is a work of fiction, it generally avoids portraying stereotypes and misconceptions about mental health. Hence why Cole is never diagnosed with the term schizophrenia. M.Night Shyamalan has explained that the reason why The Sixth Sense is less heavy on the horror elements is because he intended to make the film as real as possible. In contrast, Split can be considered disturbing and more heavily based on horror elements for several reasons, mainly because the film explores the psychological condition of the dissociative identity disorder. Additionally, the movie delves into the themes of trauma and abuse, which can be distressing for viewers. Split also incorporates elements of suspense and horror when the different personalities are interacting with the teenage girls, portraying the fear of being kidnapped and killed. Despite the supernatural and disturbing elements portrayed in the Shyamalan's films The Sixth Sense and Split, both films share an equal purpose: to provoke introspection, stimulate empathy, and offer a greater understanding of ourselves as individuals and as a community. Through the lens of fear and uncertainty, The Sixth Sense and Split both work as an example to portray how individuals in a society experience their own fears, vulnerabilities, boundaries, and struggles. And that was it, everyone. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you learned something new about both films, about M. Night Shyamalan, about the psychology and horror. I just love doing this kind of video essays because I get to learn so much and I get to share with all of you. So let me know if you like this video. Let me know if I should do more of this with different films, different directors, because horror is just an infinitive pool where we learn. So let me know. I really hope you have a nice end of the week. Please be so safe and we will talk so soon. Bye bye.